No bedroom, no lock, no privacy. Just you, your partner, and your entire tribe sleeping 5 feet away. So how did ancient humans, actually do it? The answer is weirder than you think. For most of human history, people didn't live in private houses. They lived in single, open shelters, one room, sometimes one fire, shared by the entire extended family or band. There were no interior walls, no doors that closed, no concept of my room versus your room. Privacy, as you understand it today, a locked door, a quiet room, total solitude, simply didn't exist as an option for almost anyone. For almost all of human history. This isn't guesswork. Anthropologists who have lived among and studied hunter-gatherer societies around the world have documented fairly consistent patterns in how intimacy worked without physical privacy. Two tools kept showing up again and again, across completely unrelated cultures with no contact with each other: darkness and timing. Neither required building anything. Both were already freely available every single night. Firelight was dim, and once a fire burned down to embers, a shelter became genuinely difficult to see inside clearly. Without electric light, dark meant properly dark. This darkness functioned as a kind of privacy wall that didn't need to be built. You couldn't lock a door, but you also usually couldn't clearly see what was happening a few feet away from you either. Over generations, this shaped behavior directly. Intimacy tended to happen specifically after the fire had died down, using the natural cover the night already provided. Beyond darkness, timing mattered just as much. In many documented small-scale societies, intimacy was pushed to very specific windows, typically late at night, after children and other members of the group had fallen fully asleep. This wasn't formally scheduled or spoken about directly. It was simply an unspoken rhythm the whole group understood and quietly followed, generation after generation. Waiting for stillness became the closest thing to a locked door that most people would ever have. Because physical privacy wasn't possible, social privacy had to fill the gap instead. In many small-scale societies studied by anthropologists, there were strong unspoken rules. You simply pretended not to notice. Turning away, staying quiet, and not discussing it the next morning wasn't politeness in the way we think of it today. It was survival etiquette. For a group living in constant, unavoidable close contact, this behavior is sometimes referred to by researchers as a form of polite deafness, an agreed-upon social blindness that let dozens of people share one space without constant tension. Here's the detail that makes this genuinely fascinating. Versions of this same social pattern, darkness, timing, and deliberate non-acknowledgement, show up in hunter-gatherer and small-scale farming societies across wildly different parts of the world, with no contact between them. From documented accounts of foraging groups in Africa, to indigenous communities in South America, to farming communities in parts of historical Asia, the same basic solution kept independently emerging. When you see the same workaround appear again and again in unrelated cultures, it usually means you're looking at a genuinely universal human problem, solved the only way it reasonably could be. Where climate, materials, and group size allowed it, some societies did go a step further and build or use dedicated separate spaces. Some cultures maintained separate huts for menstruation, distinct sleeping areas for unmarried adolescents, or small temporary shelters a couple could use away from the main group for a night. These solutions weren't universal. A small nomadic band moving camp every few days, carrying everything they owned, had far fewer building options than a larger, more settled community with permanent structures already in place. You might assume that once humans started building permanent villages and cities, privacy became easy. It didn't, at least not quickly. Even in early farming villages and many historical societies, multiple generations often lived and slept in a single, shared room for practical reasons: warmth, safety, and the simple cost of building additional walls. In parts of medieval Europe, for example, entire families frequently shared one bedroom, sometimes one bed, well into what we'd consider the modern era. Separate bedrooms for parents and children is a surprisingly recent standard, even in relatively wealthy households. Here's an uncomfortable but well-documented reality. In many traditional societies, children slept in the same space as parents, sometimes just a few feet away, for entirely practical reasons: warmth, protection from predators or cold, and simply not having anywhere else to safely put them. Anthropological and historical accounts suggest children in these settings often weren't fully aware of what was happening nearby, or the social norms around not noticing were strong enough and consistently reinforced enough that it functioned as background rather than something remarked upon. This wasn't considered neglectful or strange at the time. It was simply how shared, resource-limited living worked. Eventually, some societies developed simple, physical solutions that didn't require entire separate buildings. Hanging animal hides, woven mats, or fabric screens inside a single shared space to create a rough, visual barrier shows up in the archaeological and historical record across multiple regions. It wasn't soundproof, it wasn't a locked door, but a simple hanging screen dividing one corner of a shared space was often enough, combined with darkness and social norms, to create something functionally close to privacy, without requiring an entirely separate structure. Small technological fixes like this often mattered, just as much as anything architectural. It's easy for us, sitting in private bedrooms behind locking doors, to find all of this deeply uncomfortable. But that discomfort is a distinctly modern reaction, shaped entirely by modern expectations. For nearly all of human history, privacy as an individual right and a default expectation simply wasn't a widespread concept anywhere on Earth. Historians who specifically study the concept of privacy note that it's a surprisingly recent invention, closely tied to the rise of private property, individually assigned bedrooms, and larger, wealthier households with room to spare. What we now treat as a baseline human need was, for most of history, a genuine luxury that only some people, in some places, ever actually had access to. There's something worth sitting with here, despite having none of the physical privacy we consider essential today. Humans still found ways to maintain intimacy, dignity, and unspoken respect for each other's most personal moments. It didn't come from architecture. It came from cooperation, from an entire group silently agreeing, night after night, generation after generation, to look away, stay quiet, and let each other have something that couldn't be locked behind a door. In a strange way, that might be a more impressive form of privacy than four walls ever could provide. So the next time you close your bedroom door without thinking twice about it, remember, that simple click of a lock is a genuinely modern luxury, one your ancestors almost never had. For most of human history, privacy wasn't a right you were born with. It was something you negotiated every single night, with darkness, timing, and the quiet, deliberate politeness of everyone around you. If your brain enjoyed learning something this surprisingly human, hit subscribe. There's a lot more history exactly like this one still waiting to be uncovered.